Okay.
What's up, man? How you doing?
I'm fine. How you doing, Keith?
Good, man. Good to see you.
Good to see you.
Thank you, man. God, I love hanging out with you.
I think we kind of screwed up that intro, but I kind of liked it.
I do too, man.
I like the pregnant pause.
That's right.
Very
That's
cool.
right. That's right.
Okay, so for today, we're going to talk about, I hope you brought your sharp knives and also your cooking gear because we're going to do pizza dough. Pizza dough.
Made out of sweet potato crust, right?
Sweet potato crust, no white flour, never.
Good.
Okay, so let's talk about something serious. That's really an interesting topic and one I think that doesn't get a lot of play, but I think it's important for us to discuss, and that's, can life be both a blessing and also a curse at the same time, or interrelated? What do you think?
I think it can be. You know, I look back at all my growth opportunities, and at the time, I certainly saw them as a curse. And it wasn't until years later that they were actually a blessing to me.
You know, I was thinking when I was talking about the subject to myself, I was thinking about all of the things that we do in childhood that are different when we get older, or how things we do in childhood, if they're very difficult, make it maybe easier for us to make decisions as we get older. But I also think, you know, there's a physical kind of component to this too. When you think of blessing, curse, think of it like discipline in the gym. You know, that's kind of like a curse. I mean, getting the squat rack and doing that third set is a curse, you know.
Right.
But, you know, there's a blessing too when you see yourself in the mirror, or you feel strong afterwards, or you're able to compete. So I think that dichotomy, that good and bad combined, is present in a lot of areas of our lives.
Absolutely. And I think that for it to be a blessing, for the courage to actually be a blessing, you have to be conscious that within all suffering, within all pain, there's an opportunity for something good in it. And so you have to be able to see that. Eckart Tolle gave a great example in a podcast that I was listening to. And he talked about how you can have a person who has a childhood that is absent of love and support. And so it's a pretty painful childhood experience. If that person is conscious of it at the time, which most people aren't, if they're conscious of it at the time, it can actually be a blessing later on in life. And I'll tell you what else he said. Whereas you take another person who had everything in life, you know, solid family with mom and dad both at home, or, you know, both partners, both parents there, and they had love, support. Let's say that the family was affluent. They had all those things going for them, a very positive childhood with adventures, academic support, vacations, the whole 9 yards. But they really didn't have any kind of challenges. So later in life, as they continue to be successful, whether it's a Wall Street banker or an attorney or a doctor, whatever it may be, when life presents them with a challenge, which is inevitable, like they lose their job, they go through some kind of financial hardship and lose their home, go through divorce, loss of a loved one, that they can be rocked by it because they haven't, as you say, developed those calluses that the person who had a rocky childhood had to develop along the way. And so that could be really tough for them, whereas a person who, like I said, had a childhood that was absent of both love and support, they're better able to deal with it. And you pointed out that that only happens if they're conscious when they have that rough childhood, that is really making them stronger for what life challenges may be along the way. What happens if they're not conscious?
Well, two things can happen. One of two things, either one of two things happen. One is that if you're not conscious of that, you can spiral down into victimhood. Why is this happening to me? Why do I have such a terrible mother? Why is my father this? Why is my father that? Why don't I have enough money? I mean, all the things that victims do, they have a never-ending to-do list of problems that can't be solved. That's one thing. The other thing is that you can become very calloused, you can become very hardened, and you can become bitter. You can be unemotional, uninvolved with other humans, no compassion at all because your life has been so shattered. Both of those, I think, are examples of people who are going through tough times, but they're not aware of consciously accepting, as you say, the opportunity and exploiting that opportunity to make themselves better or to develop a different way of looking at life that steels them against tougher things down the road.
Yeah, and if that happens, that could define their whole lives.
Oh,
and
totally.
they live their whole lives that way. I've known
Totally.
people that have gone through divorce and they blamed a partner for something that happened years and years or even decades ago. And that still defines who they are even now. And they're shut off from love by everyone. If they ask them like, hey, listen, you know, how's life for you? And, you know, are you involved with anyone? And their answer is, no, I gave up on, you know, this, I gave up on men or I gave up on women because of this experience. It happened years ago because they didn't grow from the experience. So I think you're absolutely right. But if you're conscious, you can see it as opportunity. Our friend Tim went through a divorce quite a few years ago, and it rocked him because Tim had kind of like a storybook childhood. He didn't have a lot of challenges that, you know, both his parents were loving. There wasn't any physical or verbal abuse in his household. I had it in my household. He was fortunate. He didn't have it. You didn't have it in yours. And so when Tim went through that divorce, he was rocked by it. I mean, you and I both, we were there for the journey with him. And he took him a while. He regained his footing, and then he saw the opportunity in it. And he actually started learning from his ex some of the things that he could have done better to be a better partner in a relationship moving forward. And so it didn't define him. There was actually a blessing in what looked like a curse with the relationship for him, which is quite amazing.
I think the big challenge, though, is the consciousness part. And so I guess one of the things that a lot of people would be hung up on, and it's hard to see, is how do you develop consciousness about things that are going badly for you? And I think part of it might be just the idea that we have to be self-monitoring. We have to start looking at ourselves as the cause of all of our joy and all of our pain,
Yes.
rather than looking at our circumstance or as other people causing it, or trying to find blame. If you fault find, if you blame, if you think that other circumstances are responsible for where you're at, it's really not true. You still always have the control over your attitude. So if your attitude is about consciousness, so that you say to yourself, what am I contributing to this situation that I don't like? How in the world did I get here with all of the things that are happening to me in my own mind? How did I get here? How do I get out?
Mm-hmm.
What's going through my mind? You're always looking at what is happening,
Right.
and trying to understand your role in it. That's the key. What is your role in it? Not somebody else's role, not the circumstance, not whatever it might be that hurts you. What is your role in it? And so I think that kind of starts you down the road of being conscious, don't you think?
Absolutely, and I think another piece of that is who you surround yourself with.
Mm.
If you give them permission to call you on your stuff when you're not, when you're blaming, blame shifting, playing victim, if you give them permission to call you on it, then that can also be helpful. But it's got to start with you first. You, Tim, myself, we have that agreement between the three of us that we can call each other on it, and that's been really, really helpful.
As opposed to being around people who are enablers who say to you, you're right, yeah, that guy really did do you some dirt, or that guy's a jerk, you know what he did to so-and-so 5 years ago? It's the same thing. I mean, that's a spiral, that's a self-fulfilling prophecy, that if you believe something is bad and someone else reinforces it, that reinforces the original feeling of being bad. It's like a circle that you never get out of.
That's right.
If, on the other hand, as you say, you have friends that you are going to be completely honest with and non-judgmental, they can say to you, hey, man, you got this wrong. You got this wrong. This happened, and then you reacted this way, and that reaction of yours is what put you here.
Right.
Right? It's
Exactly.
not that stuff.
Yeah.
It's you.
And that's why you're still suffering right now.
That's right. That's right.
So how do you, with your consciousness,
Mm-hmm.
like what do you do to ensure that you're being conscious when things like that show up?
I always assume that I've caused every wrong in the world. I always like it.
Well, you start there.
That's right.
That certainly helps.
That's really big.
You're talking about full ownership.
Man, I'll tell you, the Peloponnesian War was my fault. I know Sparta really would have had a better chance had there been somebody else around me. No, I think part of it is just consistently putting yourself in the position, what did I do to bring this about? And what can I do to end my suffering in it? What is my role of responsibility
Right.
How do I improve my situation, even with what little I have? Give you a quick example, and I think we've talked about it before. Favorite author of mine actually only wrote one book that I know of, a guy named Viktor with a K, Frankl, F-R-A-N-K-L. Viktor Frankl, who was imprisoned in a concentration camp, and most of the concentration camp internees ended up dying, and he lived. And he wrote this very thin book called Man's Search for Meaning, and it was about what kept him alive, and it was about one thing that was very important to him, which was a sense of mission. And the sense of mission had to do with looking at life, what little he could do in life that was left to his free will in a concentration camp, he fully engaged in. So if he saw a cockroach walking across the floor, he focused entirely on what the cockroach was doing. He wasn't thinking about how hungry he was, how cold he was, how tired he was, how sick he was, how the deaths of others were affecting him. He was totally focused on life and that mission of being alive and trying to help other people.
Wow.
And so there's an example of being in the worst condition that you could possibly be in as a human being, a prisoner, abused, no life to speak of at all, watching your fellow inmates die. And here he was engaged in life to such a degree that he didn't blame. He was looking inward and trying to figure out how he could make sense of this in a way that kept it positive for him.
Love it. So that's what you practice, is being conscious at every step of the way and looking at, instead of creating external enemies or someone else to blame, you look at what do I bring to this situation, like what's my role. So if it's traffic, for example, and it's not moving at the flow that you would like it to, you pull it back from it being this driver's fault or that driver's fault, and like I'm in control of how I choose to be at this moment.
Traffic doesn't care. I mean, so you're getting mad about it. It's not going to change traffic's behavior, right?
Right.
Yeah, I mean, what's the
Such
point?
wasted energy.
It's just creating more pain in your own life. So I think you just have to let it go. That's another concept I think that we have to deal with too, in addition to consciousness, in order to see what the blessing is in the curse. But I think we also need to have that idea that you have to, at some point, when you're involved in living a curse, do the best that you can, and then just let it go. Just let it go.
Absolutely. What before we close out the show, let's both give an example of what was something that was a curse that we're able to see as a blessing. That maybe we haven't talked about in past shows.
Oh, great. Okay.
Okay. Want to go first?
Sure. I think one of the things that I thought was a curse for me was when I started with ToBeRe. I couldn't keep up. I was 225 pounds, I think, and I hadn't worked out in a long time, and it was a real curse for me. But below that, there was the curse that I felt like I should have, because I felt strongly about myself, I felt that I should have been given more respect, or I should have had more people like me. But I didn't do anything to earn it. So that was coming from a very low level of enlightenment, if any enlightenment at all. But the point of the story is that as I became more invested in the program, and as I became more able to deal with the challenges, the curses of the exercise and the discipline that was required, and also having to take myself down a peg from this idea that I was owed something by the others, all of that helped me realize that this curse that I felt so uncomfortable experiencing early in ToBeRe went away and eventually was replaced by this feeling of goodwill toward others and also a new respect for myself.
Oh, beautiful. An example for me would be when I was a child, I stuttered. And I stuttered probably from age 5 till age 17, 18 years old. And I was really, really embarrassed to talking in front of people. I hate reading in class. I was that kid when the teacher's having you read Shakespeare in class and everybody's taking a passage or paragraph to read. I would count which paragraph would be mine. I'd start practicing it.
Oh, boy.
And I started sweating, as it got closer and closer to my turn. And man, I just hated it. Getting on the phone, going to talk to someone, whether they were familiar or they were someone I'd never met before. It was so challenging for me. And while that seemed like such a horrible thing to be dealing with,
Sure.
it became a blessing because I dove into reading. So I love to read. Like if I could see a movie versus read, I will choose reading first. I think it really helped me expand my vocabulary. It helped me become a decent writer. I wouldn't say a great writer, that's pretty subjective, but a decent writer. And had I not stuttered, I don't think that would have ever happened. You know, I dove deep into books and reading, and so I became really fascinated with people, and I want to learn from them and what they can teach me. And so I learned to not talk as much, but to be a listener. So if anyone, you know, people often talk about when they go out with me somewhere or new people come in, like I ask so many questions, you know, about the person that are not just where you're from, but, you know, so someone says they like to go fishing. Man, tell me about an experience with your uncle who you mentioned. Like, what made that experience so rich for you? What was it that your uncle taught you along the way that is invaluable to you now as an adult that you learned on those fishing trips? So I ask questions like that, and people will say to me, like, I've known that person for 10 years. I didn't know that. You know, but I don't think that would have happened if it was not for that curse of stuttering. I wouldn't have been interested or become a good listener or cared about other people enough to learn about them. So I think that's probably one of the ones that I haven't mentioned before as an example of something that I thought was a curse, but it's actually a blessing. With all the self-work we do now, what I'm starting to be able to do, but it's taking practice, and I can't let up on the practice, is instead of the consciousness being present at the moment when something has it could go either way. It could be complete suffering and pain, or an opportunity for growth or learning, or to see something great there. Instead of it being something that happens down the road, like me reflecting back on it, oh man, when that happened a couple of years ago, look how things turned out, it was great. I'm able to start doing it in the moment now.
Boy, that's
Dude, is that powerful or what?
pretty cool.
Like something happening,
That's
and like
pretty
it's
cool.
almost like I'm able to slow it down, and the play just kind of unfolds like a quarterback on the football
Oh,
field,
man.
or a guard, or a batter in the batter's box, and the pitcher is throwing this fastball, and you start to see the threads.
Looks like a
of the
beach
ball
ball.
spinning. Yeah. You start to see the threads and the revolution. I'm starting to be able to do that, but only with a lot of practice. I'm catching myself faster and faster, and in the moment I'm starting, like it's almost real time. But that's only because of practice, though.
God dang, that's
Yeah.
advanced, boy. That's
Yeah,
powerful.
thank you.
That's
Thank
amazing.
you. Yeah, I'm working on it.
So before we wrap up, let me give you one other thought, and then you can do the wrap up for the show, what the message might be for today. I think life is full of paradox. The idea that something appears some one way, and we judge it, and then it turns out that it's not that way at all, and it might be helpful to us. That leads into a whole other show and a whole other discussion down the road, but just for a moment, consider this. Everything that you've ever done in your life, you started out not knowing how to do. Everything, in other words, became, at the beginning, sort of a curse because it was difficult and there was a long learning curve. You had no mastery, you had no experience, you had no intelligence about it, but you developed it because you had to, or because you wanted to, because you were curious about it. So the idea of uncertainty, I think, that plagues all of us in some way, is conquerable. We've done it as children, and we can do it as adults as long as we don't allow ourselves to become brown and brittle and settled in our ways, rather than green and flexible and still interested in learning. So I guess my little footnote to this show is that blessing and curse is paradox, but it's always, always helpful if you can be open-minded and you can be bendable and adaptable and looking at things in ways that are positive, where you can get the opportunity out of it.
Man, I got nothing else to say. You wrapped it up. Nice work, baby.
I think it's time for a hot dog again.
No hot dogs.
I'm telling you, off camera, we got a whole kitchen here. Nothing but hot dogs.
Ladies and gentlemen, we're going to end the show right now. Don't believe a word of that. I love you, man.
I love you too, man.
Thank you.